Welcome back. The City Press newspaper today reporting that Electricity Minister Kgosientsho Ramokgopa has raised concern with the ANC's National Working Committee about his limited powers over Eskom. It's reported that he said that only Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan has proper access to the Utilities Board. Let's try to make sense of this now. Bring in Stellenbosch University governance expert, Professor Mark Swilling. A very good evening to you, Professor. Good to have your time as always. So, in this piece out today, there's one line that refers to confusion, even in Parliament, over who is actually in charge of Eskom. Is there reason to be confused?
Well, in the way in which things have played out, yes, I think there is reason to be confused, and that was clear in the questions that were posed in Parliament by the Portfolio Committee. But, I mean, strictly speaking, we have Pravin Gordhan, who is the Minister for Public Enterprises, who is the shareholder representative with respect to the Eskom, the ownership of Eskom. And Ramokgopa's mandate was to end load shedding. So it had a very specific strategic focus. Obviously, he needs greater and greater control over Eskom in order to achieve that, which is not something he has.
And let's talk about that control. What level of control, what powers would the electricity minister actually need in order to be effective in this portfolio? Because it was, in fact, one of the main questions asked when the president announced that we would indeed have a minister for electricity seized with bringing an end to load shedding.
Well, one particular point of view would be that it wasn't necessary to appoint a minister of electricity in the president. If the president was not happy with the Minister of Public Enterprises, he should have then been fired and a new minister appointed, which could have been Ramokgopa, and then Ramokgopa would have had all the powers he needs over Eskom. However, unfortunately, the discussion about ministerial control over Eskom is highly problematic, because that's not the job of a shareholder to run a state-owned enterprises as if he is the CEO. The correct way to run an SOE is for the board to present to the shareholder a strategic plan and then to hold the CEO accountable for the implementation of that plan in a way that gives the CEO the necessary breathing space, protected breathing space and authority in order to make the necessary decisions. Mm. The ongoing political interference in Eskom, no matter by who, is not the way to run an SOE.
And is there reason to believe, Professor, that things at Eskom would have run any better if the electricity minister had had greater powers? And I ask that in the context of accusations pointed at Minister Pravin Gordhan, some saying he's part of the reason why much of the plans to resolve the crisis of the utility has not worked. Some saying even in the recent resignation of the board chair, Mpoma, he may have played a role because he's frustrated, allegedly, the process to appoint a CEO, for instance. Some saying his personality, to an extent, is part of the problem.
Well, what we have is many years of political interference in the running of Eskom as an SOE. And that really is the root of the problem. It goes way back. And so what we see is just a continuation of a highly problematic tradition of interfering in Eskom rather than giving Eskom the space that it needs to operate more autonomously as an SOE. Unfortunately, however, because of state capture and the role played by Brian Molefe and Machelo Koko in aiding and abetting state capture at Eskom and the hollowing out of Eskom, that weakened the institution and made it vulnerable to political interference. And that has just, in my view, made things worse.
And does it come down ultimately to having too many cooks, perhaps, in the Eskom kitchen? And if that is the problem, how should it be resolved?
I think that is definitely the problem. The way to resolve it is to make sure that we have we appoint a CEO is appointed that is competent and can do the job. And the previous board did make a nomination along those, not the previous board, the current board did make a recommendation along those lines. We need a new CFO if the current CFO resigns or takes retirement. And we need a competent board that understands its role. The chair of the board of Eskom cannot present himself or herself as the leader of the organization. The leader of the organization is the CEO. And the role of the shareholder is to approve the overall strategic plan for the organization and then stay out of it. If you have a competent board and a competent team, you don't need the political interference.
The other issue that came up, especially when the electricity minister appeared before Parliament's Standing Committee on Public Accounts, was about comments that he made last week at the beginning of his tour of power stations, which came to an abrupt end, where he basically promised Eskom staff incentives, bonuses, should they be able to keep the lights on at the end of the year. And the concern among members of Parliament was that perhaps he may now be setting Eskom on a collision course with Labour, because, as we know, the utility does not really have money to throw around. Did he overstep?
Well, he definitely overstepped if that kind of commitment had not been made by Eskom management. And it's not that clear what was and what was not committed to by Eskom management. So I'm saying that, yes, he definitely overstepped the mark and in a sense, started to kind of play an Eskom CEO role, which has happened before. And so if this was not a management commitment, yes, he definitely stepped over the line, and that is very problematic for a minister to be announcing bonuses.
Just lastly then, Professor Swilling, the president, of course, appoints and disappoints, they say. Ramokgopa made his plea or voiced his frustration to the ANC's National Working Committee. Who is best suited to deal with this problem?
Well, we must make a distinction we must define what the problem is. If the problem is load shedding and the specific strategic measures to end load shedding as articulated in the national, in the Energy Action Plan, then I don't see much of a problem of having a minister in the presidency responsible for that particular priority. After all, when the president made the speech where he announced the Minister of Electricity, he said he took personal responsibility for ending load shedding at the ANC conference. But he, as he said, off script, he said, but he needs help. And that was the lead-in to saying that's why he's got the Minister of Electricity in his office appointed, specifically to deal with load shedding. Now, that is a different matter to fixing Eskom and the power stations. Obviously, the two can't be totally separate. But when it comes to the institutional job of fixing Eskom as an SOE, that's probably not within the ambit of a Minister of Electricity whose specific mandate is ending load shedding.
Professor Mark Swilling, good to speak to you, governance expert with Stellenbosch University on News at Prime tonight.